Good morning, students. In last class, we learned various topics in Principles of Inheritance and Variation, Chapter 5. And what is meant by inheritance, and what is meant by heredity, and what is meant by variations, and how Mendel, here John Mendel, the father of genetics, the Pisum Sativum we learned. How today we learn how inheritance of one gene is identified by the Mendel. Normally, Mendel selected which type of plant? Garden pea plant, that is Pisum sativum. Garden pea plant, how many characters? How many characters are present in a garden pea plant? 7 characters. The 14 contrasting version, but in 7 characters. In the 7 characters, Mendel take any one of the character and performing a research in the garden, and after 7 years of research, he formulated a laws, that is laws of inheritance of living organisms. How inheritance of one gene, how monohybrid cross are taking place in the garden pea plant. Inheritance of one gene is nothing but how a particular gene is inheriting the character from one generation to next generation. For example, tallness is one character. How tallness character is passed from one generation to next generation. Mendel performed various research and experiment. After the experiment, with the use of mathematical knowledge and concept, he formulated one graph like structure with maths knowledge. So the structure or the concept is known as monohybrid cross. Okay, and in this topic we learn how one gene, a particular gene, which inheriting the character from the next generation. What are all the changes occurs in the particular generation? Okay. For that, Mendel choose a variety of characters. The one is height. Now we take height as one of the character used by the Mendel. Height. Height means in a garden pea plant, 2 versions are present. One is tall version, another one is dwarf version. In garden pea plant, some plant is tall. Tall means the plant height. Tall. The dwarf means the plant height is simple. In a simple plant which produces fruits, flowers and all things. So Mendel selecting a height of one character. In 7 characters we choose height for this monohybrid class. So tallness is nothing but the plant which grow more, that is tall plant, and some plant Pisum sativum, species of Pisum sativum is grow less. So Mendel first selecting a tall plant in one field, tall plant in one field, and dwarf plant in another field. Tall plant is considered as a male. Tall plant is considered as a male, and the dwarf plant is considered as a female. Female means use this symbol, and the male means we use this symbol. So this symbol represents the female, male, and this one is represents the female. So Mendel choose 2 charactered plants in the height, in a particular one character, that is height. In height, 2 versions, one is tall, one is dwarf. In one field, we put the Mendel sowing and growing tall pea plants. In another field, is Mendel growing dwarf pea plants. After the season, after the maturity, in particular time of maturity, the tall pea plant, actually we know the flowers in the Pisum sativum is bisexual. Bisexual means what? Listen, this is tall plant flower, this is dwarf plant flower. Tall plant flower, calyx, corolla, then the stamen, this is male part, androecium, and the pistil, the female part, is the gynosium. This is actually a tall plant flower. Tall plant also bisexual because of the male androecium and the female gynosium present. So the plant is said to be bisexual flower. Okay. Then dwarf plant. Dwarf plant also produces the same type of flowers. So no difference between tall flowers and the dwarf plants. The same only. Only height only tall and dwarf, but flower is same. Tall plant, dwarf plant also producing stamen and the pistil. Okay. In Mendel is selecting one field totally tall plant, growing a tall plant in one field, growing a dwarf plant in another field. Tall plant act as a male. Act as a male means it's actually in a dwarf plant. In a dwarf plant, due to emasculation procedure, emasculation is nothing but the removal of anther. Masculine means what? Male. Emasculation means a removal of anther. Removal of anther is known as emasculation. Removing the male gender in a bisexual. After removing the male gender with the use of various topics, the female actually is a bisexual. Mendel with the use of pair of scissors or forceps removing the male part. Removing the male part during bud stage. During bud stage, not in matured stage. During bud stage, the dwarf plant stamen or anther is removed with the use of forceps. Then the dwarf plant flower act as a female. The dwarf plant flower act as a female because male part androecium the stamen is removed. Then after maturity, this is actually a tall plant with bisexual character, and this is a dwarf plant. We are removing the stamen. This actually is converted into unisexual, that is female plant or female flower. After maturity, the tall plant stamen is cutted and the anther or the pollen grain of tall plant, anther and the pollen grain of tall plant is dusted on the stigma. Before emasculation, the male part is removed, and after emasculation, it is with the use of bag, like a polythene cover, or maybe with the use of muslin cloth, we cover the particular flower for unwanted cross pollination. So again, one time I explain. So first, Mendel take tall pea plant flower and the dwarf pea plant flower. Tall pea plant in one field and dwarf pea plant in another field. First, during bud stage, the Mendel removing dwarf pea plant anther, a dwarf pea plant stamen. The process is emasculation, a removal of anther. So the dwarf pea plant act as a female because the male part is removed. The dwarf pea plant act as a female. After removing, with the use of polythene cover or muslin cloth or butter paper, we cover the particular flower. Why we covering means unwanted, we prevent the unwanted pollen grain from the other plant. Okay, after bagging, the process is bagging. First emasculation, then the covering of the flower with the use of cover is known as bagging. After maturity, we remove the anther from the tall plant and powdering or scenting up, pouring the pollen grain, dusting the pollen grain in the stigma of the dwarf pea plant. The cover is removed, and after dusting, again the cover is backed, that is rebacked, for preventing the contamination of unwanted pollen grain. In this research, in this cross, the tall pea plant acts as a male and the dwarf pea plant acts as a female. Then after maturity, the dwarf pea plant ovary producing fruits. After conversion, ovary converted into fruits and the ovules converted into seeds. Then the seeds of dwarf plant. The seeds of dwarf plant are shown in the next field. One field tall pea plant and another field dwarf pea plant. We take the tall pea plant anther and fertilize, pollinate the dwarf pea plant stigma. After fertilization, we take seed from the dwarf pea plant and put into the another field, and the particular generation is known as F1 generation, the first generation, filial 1 generation. Okay, then we take the seeds from the dwarf plant. And what type of plants are produced in F1? Normally, we taking male part from the tall and the female part from the dwarf. In the F1 generation, what type of characters in the first generation, what type of characters are expressed means, normally we thinking maybe tall 50%, dwarf 50%. But in Mendel's result, only tall plant are produced. Only tall plant. No dwarf plants. Why the dwarf plant is not produced? Normally we take seed from the dwarf plant. Only we take male gamete from the tall and the female gamete from the dwarf, and seed also taken from the dwarf plant. So normally tall only is developed generally, but according to the Mendel research, only tall pea plant are produced. The Mendel thinking, why the dwarf plant is not expressed in F1 generation? Only all the tall plant are pure, only tall plant, not the dwarf plant. The Mendel thinking, how only tall plants, why not dwarf plant is not expressed? So after the conclusion, after the research, he concluded the tall plant is expressed in F1 generation. So the tallness is regarded as dominant trait. Okay, dominant means is nothing but the character is expressed in F1 generation. The character is expressed in F1 generation is said to be dominant. The character is not expressed. Here in F1 generation, what type of character is expressed? Only tallness is expressed. Dwarf is not expressed. So dwarfness is recessive and the tallness is dominant. Then F1 tall plant. F1 tall plant is crossed with same type of tall plant. F1 tall plants crossed with the same type of tall plants. Then the Mendel produced another generation, that is F2 generation. F2 generation. Okay. In Mendel, tall plant in the parents act as a male and the dwarf is act as a female. And in hybridization, after hybridization, emasculation, bagging and all the cross-pollination occurs. After that, F1 plants are produced. F1 plants are tall plants. Because the tallness is dominant, dwarf is not expressed in F1, so dwarfness is recessive according to the Mendel's words. So then Mendel again the two tall plants cross hybridization. Cross hybrid the two tall plants in the F1 generation. Then in F2 generation, tall plant 3, and the dwarf plant only 1. So in the F2 generation, the next generation, filial 2 generation, only tall plant, 2 tall plants hybridized and cross pollinate the 2 tall plants. In F2 generation, only tall 3%, 3:1 ratio. Here also dwarf is fully not expressed. Only 25% of dwarf is expressed, and 75% is tall is expressed. According to this theory, according to this experiment, is actually Mendel performing these experiment in the field, in the monastery field, in the garden of the monastery. So after this research, Mendel, with the use of mathematical knowledge, this is actually basic research by the Mendel. With the use of mathematical knowledge, the Mendel formulated cross. With the use of these characters, Mendel formulated with the cross. The cross is said to be monohybrid cross. How monohybrid cross? By the Mendel. Okay. So now, how the Mendel, with the use of mathematical knowledge, Mendel formulated the monohybrid cross. Okay. Actually, already we studied in the 10th standard monohybrid class. Monohybrid class. With the use of Mendel's knowledge, Mendel's mathematical knowledge, formulated a monohybrid class. Monohybrid class is different, like in one gene. For example, the same class, tall plant, it crossed with the dwarf plant. What is meant tall? Tall means it's actually a tall plant, tallness. And tall plant, we consider tallness is capital T, capital T. Tallness is controlled by 2 genes, that is capital T, capital T. Here dwarfness is controlled by small t, small t, not small t, small t. According to the Mendel's test, for example, tallness we consider capital T means in dwarfness not t. Small t, in this small version only we consider as per the rule. This actually varies. Varies producing gamete. Example, in gamete tau, that is small t, considered as a dwarf plant gamete. This one actually gamete. Then male gamete fused with the female gamete. In the last study, and in F1 generation are produced capital T, small t. This is actually F1 generation. F1 means what? Filial 1. Filial means what? Son or original. Okay, filial. In capital T, small t, the same caste, same plant, or same flower, self-pollinated. Self-pollination. Okay. So Mendel take tall pea plant in one field, dwarf pea plant in another field. In the tall pea plant, the Mendel taken gamete is actually a male gamete followed by Mendel used the dwarf pea plant for the female gamete. The male and female gamete are fused, fertilization. Then the F1 generation, first generation of plant are produced. The first generation plant, the character of the first generation plant is tall. So actually, which capital T, example, capital T is representing the top, and small t person, but its capital T is dominating over the small t. So tallness is expressed. The same tall plant, another tall plant is crossed. Then gametes are produced in F2 for the F2 generation. For example, tall plant using two kinds of gametes here. It has two persons or genes or factors represent capital T and small t. Here also capital T and small t. Okay, normally for the gamete we put round for easy identification. That is gamete. And for the crossing, simple logic, we put a small dot. The tall plant male gamete fused with another tall plant female gamete. Then tall plant male gamete is fused with another dwarf plant female gamete. Here, tall plant small t gamete fused with another one capital T gamete. Then small t gamete with small t gamete. What are the characters are produced? Capital T, capital T, small t. Here, capital T only caps T first because this is dominant. And here small t. Okay, this is actually F2 generation. F2 generation is filial 2 generation. In F2 generation, here also tall, this is also tall, this is also tall. Tallness 3, dwarfness 1. According to the mental study, ratio phenotype ratio. What is the phenotype? Phenotype means external appearance. Genotype means internal genes. Phenotype means externally, morphologically. This is also tall plant. Here, this is also tall plant, but genetically is different. Here also genetically the plant is different from this plant, but morphologically capital T also tall, capital T small t also tall, capital T small t also tall. So morphologically tall plant phenotypic ratio of F2 generation. Phenotypic ratio of F2 generation is actually tall tree plant with the dwarf. Tall tree plant how many? 3, 1, 2, 3 in F2 generation. Dwarf tree plant 1. So phenotypic ratio of F2 generation is nothing but 3 tall plants and 1 dwarf plants in F2 generation. Then the genotypic ratio. Genotypic means genes are. Here tall tree plant. How tall? Both are tall. Consider another term. So, for example, capital T is actually capital T. It is homozygous tall. Both are same. Homozygous tall. Another person, heterozygous tall. Here, this is tall only, but genetically different. So, heterozygous tall. Then the last one is homozygous dwarf. Small t. Then homozygous tall only 1, and the heterozygous tall 2, and the homozygous dwarf is 1. So according to the mentalist mathematical concept, in monohybrous inheritance of one gene, the mental is selecting tall tree plant and the dwarf tree plant in another field. Tall tree plant or brain are taken the class with the dwarf tree plant stigma and egg, and F1 generation are produced. According to the mentalist knowledge, F1 generation are all are tall, only tall, no dwarf, no medium height. So the tall plants are self-correlated with another tall plant and maybe same plant. And F2 generation are produced. In F2 generation, different gametes are produced because two gametes the two gametes are present in the tall plant. So gametes are produced. In phenotypically, 3:1 the ratio are produced. 3 tall plant and the dwarf plant 1. And genotypically, homozygoston 1 and the heterozygoston is 2 and the homozygous graph is 1. Okay, this copy in your classwork. This is actually monohybrid. How questions are asked for your board exam is draw a work out a monohybrid class between target plant and the traffic plant and show the phenotypic and genotypic ratio of the food generation. In 2 marks, work out a monohybrid class between target plant and the traffic plant and work out the phenotypic and genotypic ratio of F2 generation. Means you should draw the list of things including parents, gametes, and filial reproduction, gametes self-pollination, gametes for example, the question contains 2 marks means parents, gametes are 1.5 marks. The gametes characteristic self-pollination and ratio phenotypic ratio calculated means half a mark. We divide various marks half of a mark. So all these right means we get a 2 out of 2. Okay, work out the monohybrid class between target plant and the draft plant. Okay, this copy we give another example also. Round is there and the ring is there. Normally you check target plant means here small t only, not d. Round means here ring smaller only, not w. Okay, I give another example also. The same class. First in notebook and next one I give another one in the class. So according to the Mendel birds, Mendel is not knowing about genes. Normally we know genes is nothing but the segment of DNA which controls the characters which inherit the character from one generation to the next generation. According to the Mendel's birds, there is factors. Factors is nothing but gene only, but Mendel is not knowing about gene. So Mendel called as a gene is factors. Now only we call the factors as a gene. Okay, factors is nothing but gene only according to the Mendel's. For example, capital T. So actually this is allele here. Allele. For example, capital T is allele. Allele means what? Pair of contrasting characters. Capital T, small t also allele. For example, tallness is controlled by capital T factor and the small t factor is controlling the tallness. Our tall the character is controlled by 2 factors, capital T one factor, small t one factor. Both the factor is contrasting, capital T and small t. Maybe sometimes you say capital T. A pair of contrasting trait, contrasting factor is known as allele. Okay, capital T, small t is actually allele. The allele, the factors is not normally not used these terms in recent years because in Mendel's time, Mendel used factors. Factors means, for example, capital T one factor, small t one factor, and capital R for roundness one factor, small r is one factor. All the characters in all the 7 characters. Alleles means pair of factors. Capital T, allele, pair of different contrasting characters. Capital T, small t also allele. Capital T, small t is example for allele. Allele means is nothing but contrasting 2 factors. A pair of contrasting traits, a pair of contrasting factors is known as allele. Then in monohybrid class, normally we use one technique, but in some your result use another technique. This square in F1 and F2 class in the form of square. Okay, the square is Punnett square is formulated and introduced by the British geneticist. Geneticist means the scientist who study genetics. British scientist, the geneticist, that is Reginald Punnett. So Punnett, the scientist name. According to the Punnett, he formulated one square wave structure for monohybrid as well as dihybrid plants. To the use of square, we calculated various male and female gametes and formulated the F1 and F2 generations. The square is actually Punnett square. In dihybrid plants, we use the Punnett square. In monohybrid plants, simple only, so we have to use the Punnett square. But in dihybrid plants, we use Punnett, and the Punnett square in the dihybrid plants will not. Okay, Punnett square is nothing but the square used by the Reginald Punnett, but for monohybrid as well as dihybrid plants. Okay, the next one, the another example of monohybrid plants. Okay, already I have studied one example for monohybrid plants. Next example for the non-hybrid plants. Okay, so now we take the round and ringed, round seeded plants. Around the seed is actually regarded as capital R, and the ringed seed is used as small. Normally, some persons sometimes we use W. It's not correct. It's actually wrong. According to the rules, we use capital R for the round space. For the ringed seed, we use only this small, not W or small w is actually one. According to the conventional rules, the roundness capital R we use. The ringed we use small. It's actually correct. Don't use small w or any other things. It is actually wrong. Round seed is actually not balanced. Then it produces gamete, male gamete and female gamete. What is this? Is gamete. Okay, it draws the gamete. Capital R is smaller. In F1 generation, capital R smaller. This is actually F1 generation. Female one generation, first generation. Morphologically, this is the plant producing round seed. Same another round seed plants used as self-pollination or same H1B others. Okay. Then gamete, capital gamete and smaller gamete. When drawing, use space, so easily access is visible. This gamete. Okay, that we have small amount space. The first gamete is the round, and the first one gamete is the fourth. So actually, one male gamete and the female gamete, and one male gamete and another female gamete. Male gamete, yeah, female gamete, male gamete, female. Capital R, small r. So again, small r, because roundness is down. So we use capital R first. Plus roundness is down. And small r. This is actually a full generation. Okay. Then the phenotypic ratio is the same. Phenotypic ratio of full generation. Phenotypic ratio is round seeded and ringed seeded. Round is 3 and ringed 1. Then the genotypic ratio here, this round. Round morphologically this is round. is genetically very different. The next is genotype ratio. Here, homozygous syndrome. Capital R, capital R. Capital R, capital R means R1, and capital R, small r 2, and the small r 1. This is actually genotype ratio of left generation. Same class, same ratio only. You practice for the other 7 characters. Like axial class means you take dominant character. Axial and irregular means you take capital A, small a. Violet and white means you take capital BB and small bb. Which one is dominant means use the particular symbol. For example, dominance is dominant. First one is dominant. In the book, inside the book or box is given. The first one is dominant. For example, dog is dominant means use capital R, capital R. Here use small r.